World Without End wasn't just a science fiction thriller, it was H.G. Wells's estate's plagiarism lawsuit waiting to happen. Poverty Row's desperate gamble to become Hollywood royalty by shooting Technicolor CinemaScope with recycled props from a 1951 failure. Sam Peckinpah's uncredited dialogue directing debut before he became cinema's master of violence, and the film where Alberto Vargas, the pinup artist who painted bombshells on World War II bombers, received his only screen credit for sketching women in miniskirts. Behind the rubber spiders and one-eyed mutants lay a production fueled by a director cramming Einstein's relativity theory overnight, a studio recycling everything from costumes to spaceship footage, while pretending to spend big. Hugh Marlowe's lazy unprofessionalism infuriating everyone on set, and Rod Taylor wrestling giant mechanical arachnids in his first major role before becoming the Time Machine star. What audiences saw as Allied artists' A-picture ambitions was actually B-movie thrift dressed in expensive photography, a film that beat Forbidden Planet to theaters by months and sparked a lawsuit that ironically led to the producers making the official Time Machine adaptation 4 years later. Today, we're traveling 500 years into the future to reveal 12 weird facts about World Without End, and stick around for a bonus fact about the double feature that paired mutants with Lon Chaney Jr.'s resurrection. Number 12. Wells' estate sued for plagiarism. The estate of H.G. Wells initiated a plagiarism lawsuit against Allied artists for copyright infringement, claiming World Without End illegally borrowed from Wells's 1895 novel, The Time Machine. The similarities were undeniable. Astronauts travel to Earth's future, discover civilization has split into two groups, beautiful surface dwellers and hideous underground mutants, and find humanity degraded by catastrophe. Wells' estate argued this was their intellectual property stolen without permission or payment. The lawsuit didn't shut down the film's release or result in massive damages, but it accomplished something more interesting. It shamed Allied artists into acknowledging the debt. 4 years later, in 1960, Allied artist-producers Walter Mirisch and George Pal made the first official cinematic adaptation of The Time Machine, starring Rod Taylor, the same beefy Australian actor who'd appeared in World Without End. This created a bizarre circular narrative. Allied artists allegedly stole from Wells, got sued, then paid for the rights to properly adapt the same material they'd already adapted without permission. The estate's lawsuit essentially forced Allied to legitimize their plagiarism retroactively. Taylor's casting in both films completed the circle. The actor who'd battled mutants in the unofficial adaptation became the hero of the authorized one. Whether the lawsuit's settlement included agreements about future adaptations remains unclear, but the timing suggests Wells's estate extracted promises beyond simple cash payments. Number 11. Poverty Row's CinemaScope gamble. Allied artists had more in common with Poverty Row studios like Eagle Lion, Republic, and Monogram than with major studios when they greenlit World Without End. Monogram Pictures, Allied's predecessor, had average budgets around $90,000 and churned out 9 super low-budget Bela Lugosi films between 1941 and 1944. With the studio system's collapse in 1954 and television devouring low-budget studios, Walter Mirisch saw opportunity to compete in the big leagues. The studio's strategy was audacious. Mount a science fiction film in expensive Technicolor and CinemaScope to project prestige they didn't actually possess. Director Edward Bernds called it a picture mounting for a budgeted picture. Allied artists bragged that World Without End was the first science fiction film shot in CinemaScope and Technicolor, beating MGM's Forbidden Planet to theaters by several months. Despite Forbidden Planet's massive $800,000 budget dwarfing Allied's production costs. This timing wasn't accidental. Allied rushed production specifically to claim the first sci-fi CinemaScope title before the major studios could. The gamble worked commercially, the film made Allied artists respectable money, and proved Poverty Row Studios could compete visually with Hollywood majors if they picked their battles carefully. The CinemaScope photography by Ellsworth Fredericks was genuinely spectacular, using the wide frame beautifully despite budget limitations. Critics praised the film's look while dismissing its derivative story, exactly the response Allied wanted. Audiences remembered the visual spectacle, not the recycled plot. Number 10. Sam Peckinpah's uncredited dialogue work. A wiry 31-year-old Californian named Sam Peckinpah worked as uncredited dialogue director on World Without End, his first significant film work before becoming one of cinema's most distinctive and controversial action directors. Peckinpah would later direct Ride the High Country, 1962, Major Dundee, 1965, The Wild Bunch, 1969, and revolutionized screen violence with slow-motion ballet of death sequences that defined 1970s cinema. In 1956, Peckinpah was nobody. a theater major trying to break into Hollywood, willing to take any job to learn filmmaking. Dialogue directing meant coaching actors' online delivery, ensuring technical consistency across takes, and solving on-set performance problems the director didn't have time to address. Director Edward Bernds likely gave Peckinpah minimal credit because dialogue directors were considered technical support rather than creative contributors. The irony is rich. The man who would become famous for operatic violence, mythic westerns, and revisionist anti-heroes started by helping Hugh Marlowe deliver exposition about time dilation and Einstein's relativity. Peckinpah's presence on World Without End connects 1950s B-movie science fiction to 1960s to 70s auteur cinema, demonstrating how Hollywood's apprenticeship system turned technical workers into visionary directors. Whether Peckinpah learned anything useful about visual storytelling from Edward Bernds' workmanlike direction is debatable, but the experience taught him how low-budget productions maximized limited resources, a skill he'd need throughout his turbulent career fighting studios for creative control. Number 9. Vargas Girls in Space. Alberto Vargas, the legendary pinup artist whose curvaceous Vargas girls had graced World War II bomber nose art and Esquire magazine centerfolds, received his only screen credit for World Without End. Vargas created set sketches and production artwork, his unmistakable style visible in the film's costume designs for female characters, mini-skirted women with improbable proportions whose wardrobes seemed designed more for male gaze than post-apocalyptic survival. Vargas had dominated American pinup art for 2 decades, his airbrushed beauties defining 1940s masculine fantasy. By the 1950s, his commercial work had declined as photography replaced illustration in advertising, and Vargas needed income. Allied artists hired him for World Without End, likely to add prestige. Artwork by Alberto Vargas suggested sophistication even as his sketches depicted scantily, clad women fleeing rubber spiders. The film's female costume design bears Vargas's unmistakable aesthetic: elongated legs, impossible curves, strategically draped fabric revealing maximum skin while maintaining production code compliance. Critics and audiences noted the jarring disconnect between the film's serious themes, nuclear holocaust, genetic mutation, civilization's collapse, and its parade of beautiful women dressed like Vegas showgirls. That disconnect is pure Vargas, an artist who never saw contradiction between high-minded subject matter and objectifying female bodies. His sole screen credit represents a curious, cultural moment when commercial illustration's greatest pinup artist tried translating his 2-dimensional fantasies into 3-dimensional cinema, creating costumes that look magnificent as drawings but absurd on actual human women. Number 8. Marlowe's unprofessional laziness. Hugh Marlowe, cast as the lead astronaut John Borden, frustrated director Edward Bernds with his lazy, unprofessional attitude throughout production. Bernds had originally wanted Sterling Hayden or Frank Lovejoy for the role, but both actors rejected the part, forcing him to settle for Marlowe, a competent but unremarkable character actor whose biggest role had been in All About Eve, 1950. Marlowe approached World Without End as beneath his talents, a paycheck assignment requiring minimal effort. Bernds later complained that Marlowe showed up unprepared, flubbed lines repeatedly, and displayed contempt for the material that infected the entire production. The performance shows this indifference. Marlowe delivers every line with flat, effectless monotone, displaying zero chemistry with his co-stars and making the heroic astronaut seem bored by his own adventure. Variety's review noted the film had an ad-lib quality throughout that's reflected in slow-moving pace and performances, directly criticizing Bernds' direction but inadvertently diagnosing Marlowe's lazy performance. Bernds couldn't fire his lead actor mid-production, so he compensated by giving more screen time to Rod Taylor, whose enthusiasm and professionalism made him the film's de facto star despite his smaller role. Marlowe's unprofessionalism demonstrates how casting compromises poison productions. The 2 actors Bernds wanted would have brought gravitas and commitment, while the actor he got treated the assignment as slumming, creating a vacuum at the film's center that no amount of CinemaScope spectacle could fill. Number 7. Bernds cramming Einstein's relativity. Edward Bernds, unaccustomed to science fiction, crammed for his assignment by speed-reading ArthurC.com. Clarke's 1950 book Interplanetary Flight, an introduction to astronautics and studying Albert Einstein's theories on time relativity to give his space travelers a plausible way to jump into the future. Bernds had built his career directing Three Stooges shorts and Bowery Boys features, slapstick comedy requiring zero scientific knowledge. Suddenly tasked with crafting believable time travel, he educated himself frantically. The effort shows in the film's opening exposition, where characters discuss acceleration, time dilation, and relativistic effects with surprising technical accuracy for 1956 B-movie science fiction. When the spaceship accelerates to incredible velocities and the astronauts black out, the film explicitly references Einstein's theories about time moving differently at near-light speeds. Critics noted this scientific seriousness elevated World Without End above typical 1950s sci-fi nonsense, even as the rubber spiders and one-eyed mutants undercut that credibility. Bernds' crash course in theoretical physics demonstrates the professionalism of B-movie directors who research their subjects despite limited budgets and rushed schedules. He could have ignored scientific plausibility, most genre contemporaries did, but he took pride in crafting intelligent exposition, even when producer Richard Heermans wanted only spectacle. This attention to scientific detail, however simplified for popular audiences, helped World Without End find favor with science fiction fans who appreciated Bernds treating their intelligence seriously. The director, who spent weeks studying relativity theory, would later helm Valley of the Dragons, 1961, and Queen of Outer Space, 1958. Proving his Einstein cramming didn't transform him into serious science fiction auteur, but it gave World Without End conceptual foundation most Poverty Row productions lacked. Number 6. Flight to Mars recycling. Allied artists built World Without End specifically around recycling footage, costumes, props, and sets from their 1951 science fiction flop, Flight to Mars. Producer Richard Heermans tasked Edward Bernds with crafting a story that could reuse minutes of spaceship travel footage already in Allied's vaults, saving thousands of dollars on expensive effects photography. The recycling extended beyond stock footage. Flight to Mars costumes appeared on World Without End's underground civilization residence. Sets were redressed and repainted. Props were repurposed. Even the spaceship models were the same physical miniatures filmed 5 years earlier. The problem: Flight to Mars was shot in standard 1.33 by 1 aspect ratio, while World Without End used CinemaScope's 2.55 by 1 widescreen format. The spaceship footage had to be severely cropped, cutting off top and bottom to fit the wider frame, creating compositional awkwardness obvious to anyone paying attention. Bernds complained about this cost-cutting absurdity in later interviews. It's strange how some producers got hooked on the idea of saving money by using stock film. You could duplicate those stock shots for a few $1,000s. Are you going to make a $400,000 picture on the basis of saving a few bucks? The question was rhetorical. Heermans absolutely made a $400,000 picture to save a few $1,000s on new spaceship effects. This penny-wise, pound-foolish mentality typified Poverty Row thinking even as Allied artists tried projecting major studio prestige. The studio spent money on Technicolor and CinemaScope photography, but recycled 5-year-old footage from a commercial failure, creating visual inconsistency that undermined their expensive presentation. Number 5. Rod Taylor's enthusiastic debut. 26-year-old Australian actor Rod Taylor, new to Hollywood and desperate to prove himself, brought enthusiasm and professionalism that director Edward Bernds found refreshing after Hugh Marlowe's lazy indifference. Taylor played Herbert Ellis, the radio man, using his natural Australian accent, a rarity in 1950s Hollywood, where Australian actors were typically forced to adopt American or British accents. Bernds praised Taylor's eagerness to please and willingness to perform demanding physical stunts, including wrestling the mechanical giant spider that attacked his character in the underground caves. Taylor's commitment elevated every scene he appeared in, his genuine enthusiasm contrasting sharply with Marlowe's board-line readings. The performance caught MGM's attention, earning Taylor a long-term contract and quality supporting parts in Giant, 1956, and Raintree County, 1957, en route to international stardom in The Time Machine, 1960, and The Birds, 1960-63. Taylor's career trajectory from World Without End to The Time Machine creates perfect circular irony. The actor who appeared in Allied artists' plagiarized Time Machine knockoff became the official adaptation's star 4 years later. His presence in both films suggests Wells's estate's lawsuit included provisions about casting or that producers simply recognized Taylor's perfect fit for the material. Bernds' early confidence in Taylor proved prophetic. The young Australian actor working for scale in a low-budget science fiction film became one of 1960s cinema's most reliable leading men, his World Without End performance demonstrating charisma and physicality that would define his career. Number 4. Iverson Ranch as Future Earth. Post-apocalyptic Earth in World Without End looks suspiciously like Southern California's Iverson Ranch, the movie location that appeared in hundreds of westerns, serials, and low-budget productions. Rather than building elaborate destroyed cityscapes or futuristic landscapes, Bernds simply filmed among Iverson's distinctive rock formations, adding rubble and debris to suggest nuclear devastation. This cost-saving geography was standard practice for 1950s B-movies, which couldn't afford elaborate sets or location shooting beyond Los Angeles County. Iverson Ranch provided free, accessible outdoor filming space with dramatic rock formations that photographed well in CinemaScope. The problem: audiences had seen these exact rocks in countless westerns and serials, destroying any illusion of distant future or alien planet. Film historians and Western fans immediately recognized locations, noting that the devastated future Earth looked identical to places where Gene Autry had ridden horses and serial heroes had chased villains. Bernds defended this creative geography by noting that nuclear war might preserve Southern California's geological features even as civilization collapsed, a retroactive justification for simple budgetary necessity. The Iverson locations actually work better in CinemaScope than in standard ratio, the wide frame capturing landscape scope that makes the familiar locations feel more epic. Cinematographer Ellsworth Fredericks used the ranch's natural beauty effectively, proving skilled photography can elevate cheap locations. Still, the cognitive dissonance of watching astronauts from 2,508 exploring rocks visible from modern Los Angeles freeways undermined the film's futuristic ambitions. Another example of Allied artists' contradictory approach: spending money on expensive photography of cheap locations. Number 3. Fredericks' CinemaScope mastery. Cinematographer Ellsworth Fredericks shot World Without End with remarkable skill, using the CinemaScope frame creatively despite budget limitations and recycled sets. Fredericks had experience with widescreen formats and understood how to compose for the elongated 2.55 by 1 aspect ratio that intimidated many cinematographers in 1956. His work on World Without End showcases deep focus compositions that fill the wide frame with visual information, characters positioned at different depths, architectural elements, framing, action, and landscape shots that emphasize scope and isolation. The underground civilization sequences demonstrate particularly clever use of CinemaScope, making cramped sets feel expansive through careful staging and lighting. Fredericks' Technicolor photography features the deep, saturated hues typical of 1950s color film, with particularly strong reds and blues that make costumes and set decoration pop. The Warner Archive Blu-ray restoration reveals every detail of Fredericks' craftsmanship: the sharp focus, the careful lighting ratios, the composition sophistication often hidden in degraded prints. Critics who dismissed World Without End's derivative story still praised its visual beauty, credit entirely to Fredericks' skill. He shot everything from Gary Cooper Quaker drama Friendly Persuasion, 1956, to Don Siegel's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956, the same year, demonstrating remarkable versatility. His World Without End cinematography proves that even low-budget science fiction could achieve visual elegance when skilled craftsmen applied major studio techniques to Poverty Row projects. The film's lasting cult appeal owes more to Fredericks' gorgeous photography than to Bernds' workmanlike direction or the recycled sets and costumes. Number 2. Stevens' minimal musical score. Composer Leith Stevens created a remarkably restrained musical score for World Without End, knowing when to let visuals and dialogue carry scenes without orchestral manipulation. Stevens had scored major films including Destination Moon, 1950, and The Wild One, 1953, bringing experience and sophistication to Allied artists' production. His World Without End music appears sparingly, providing emotional support during crucial sequences: the time warp travel, discovering the devastated Earth, confronting mutants, but receding completely during exposition and character interaction. This restraint was essential for science fiction, requiring audiences to process complex scientific concepts. Overscoring would have overwhelmed dialogue and distracted from visual storytelling. Stevens' main theme establishes heroic adventure tone without becoming bombastic, while his mutant attack music creates genuine tension through dissonant strings and aggressive percussion. The score never tells audiences how to feel, instead amplifying emotions already present in performances and cinematography. Critics noted the film's professional musical quality, unusual for Poverty Row productions that often recycled library music or commissioned minimal scoring to save money. Stevens' involvement demonstrated Allied artists' commitment to hiring top talent even for B pictures, another example of their contradictory approach: professional composer creating sophisticated score for film with rubber spiders and recycled costumes. The music holds up better than the effects. Stevens' craftsmanship transcending the film's technical limitations and elevating World Without End above typical 1950s science fiction schlock. Number 1. Indestructible Man double feature. World Without End was distributed theatrically on a double feature with Indestructible Man, 1956, a Lon Chaney Jr. horror film also produced by Allied artists. This pairing demonstrated studio efficiency, releasing two genre films simultaneously, allowing theaters to advertise double the entertainment, while Allied artists collected twice the rental fees. In some markets, World Without End was actually top billed above Indestructible Man, despite Chaney's greater name recognition, suggesting Allied believed their CinemaScope color science fiction film had more commercial appeal than black and white horror. Other markets reversed the billing, making Chaney's monster movie the main attraction. Director Edward Bernds claimed, World Without End made Allied artists quite a bit of money, though film historian Tom Weaver suggested the box office results weren't spectacular. The truth likely falls between. The film probably earned respectable returns on its modest budget without becoming a breakout hit. Variety's review called it plenty corny with slow-moving pace, not exactly ringing endorsement. The double feature later included Attack of the Crab Monsters, 1957, in some territories, pairing World Without End with Roger Corman's Creature feature. These exploitation pairings typified 1950s B-movie distribution, where studios hedged commercial risk by bundling multiple genre films together, ensuring audiences got spectacle regardless of individual film quality. The strategy worked. Teenagers and science fiction fans filled drive-ins and neighborhood theaters, making Allied artists respectable profits even when individual features like World Without End and Indestructible Man failed to distinguish themselves artistically. Bonus fact: British release with Bowery Boys. World Without End's United Kingdom release paired it not with Indestructible Man, but with the Bowery Boys in Spy Chasers, 1955, creating one of cinema's most bizarre double features. British distributors apparently decided that pairing American astronauts battling future mutants with slapstick comedy idiots chasing spies made perfect programming sense, demonstrating the cultural randomness of international film distribution. The Bowery Boys were American comedy institutions, working-class New York teenagers, played by middle-aged men, getting into comic misadventures, the film equivalent of comfort food for audiences wanting undemanding entertainment. Pairing them with serious science fiction about nuclear holocaust and civilization's collapse created tonal whiplash that must have confused British audiences expecting coherent double features. This programming decision reveals how little distributors cared about thematic consistency, viewing films purely as interchangeable commodities to fill theater seats. If one picture featured Americans and the other picture also featured Americans, close enough, bundle them together and collect rental fees. The pairing also suggests British distributors considered World Without End juvenile entertainment despite its adult themes, grouping it with children's comedy rather than serious science fiction like Forbidden Planet. Edward Bernds directed multiple Bowery Boys features earlier in his career, creating additional irony. His own Bowery Boys films became supporting features for his attempted prestige science fiction picture. The bizarre double feature epitomizes 1950s B-movie distribution chaos, where commercial logic trumped artistic or thematic coherence, films treated as fungible products rather than artistic statements deserving thoughtful presentation. World Without End endures not as forgotten B-movie, but as ambitious Poverty Row gamble that succeeded beyond expectations. Allied artists shed their disreputable image, launched Rod Taylor's career, and proved low-budget studios could compete visually with Hollywood majors when choosing battles carefully. The darkness behind its creation, the Wells plagiarism lawsuit, the recycled Flight to Mars footage, Marlowe's lazy unprofessionalism, Bernds cramming Einstein overnight, the Iverson Ranch masquerading as future Earth, makes its achievement more remarkable. A film built from spare parts and desperate ambition somehow became the first CinemaScope science fiction spectacle, beating MGM's Forbidden Planet to theaters and proving technical sophistication could coexist with B-movie budgets. Sam Peckinpah learned filmmaking. Alberto Vargas got his only screen credit. Rod Taylor wrestled rubber spiders before becoming the Time Machine star. And Edward Bernds proved studying relativity theory elevated even recycled costumes and stolen footage into something resembling art. The studio that couldn't afford new spaceship effects somehow convinced audiences they were watching prestigious science fiction rather than dressed-up schlock.